In the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, beneath the scorching Anatolian sun, lies a secret that remained hidden for over 10,000 years. A secret so profound that when finally revealed, it would force us to completely rewrite the story of human civilization. This is the story of Göbekli Tepe, humanity's oldest known temple, and perhaps the most important archaeological discovery of our lifetime. The year was 1994. In Turkey's Sanliurfa province, a shepherd named Savik Yildiz was tending his flock across familiar landscape he had walked countless times before. But on this particular day, something caught his eye: stones jutting from the earth that seemed unusual, deliberately shaped, different from the natural limestone scattered across the region. For years, local farmers had noticed these stones. Some had even been broken apart and used in construction, their true significance completely unknown. But Savik's observation would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of archaeology. Word reached the German Archaeological Institute. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first visited the site in 1994, he immediately recognized something extraordinary. Unlike colleagues who had previously surveyed the area and dismissed it as merely a medieval cemetery, Schmidt saw telltale signs of something far more ancient, far more significant. What he couldn't have known was that he was standing atop a site that would consume the next 2 decades of his life and challenge everything scholars believed about civilization's birth. As excavations began in 1995, the team started uncovering something that seemed impossible. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars emerged from the earth, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons. These weren't crude markers or simple standing stones. They were sophisticated megalithic structures, carefully carved and deliberately positioned. The pillars were arranged in circles, forming what appeared to be ceremonial enclosures. And they were covered, absolutely covered, in intricate carvings. Snakes writhing across stone surfaces, foxes frozen in eternal prowl, lions displaying fearsome power, scorpions with raised tails, birds in flight, charging bulls, leaping gazelles. The artistic skill was breathtaking. These weren't primitive scratches or simple outlines. These were sophisticated bas-reliefs, showing detailed anatomical knowledge and artistic mastery. But when dating results came back, the true shock hit the archaeological community. Göbekli Tepe wasn't 5,000 or even 8,000 years old. The earliest structures dated to approximately 9,600 BC, nearly 12,000 years ago. To put this in perspective, this temple complex was already 6,500 years old when construction began on the Great Pyramid of Giza. It predated Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It was built before pottery, before writing, before the wheel, before metal tools of any kind. This was, without question, the oldest monumental architecture ever discovered. To understand why Göbekli Tepe was so revolutionary, we need to understand what archaeologists believed about civilization's birth before 1994. The traditional narrative went like this. For millions of years, humans lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving constantly in small bands, following game animals and seasonal plants. Life was harsh, short, and focused entirely on survival. Then, around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, something changed. Humans discovered agriculture. They learned to plant seeds and harvest crops. They domesticated animals. With reliable food sources, they could stay in one place. Permanent settlements emerged. Villages formed. As populations grew, social hierarchies developed. Leaders emerged. Specialized roles appeared: farmers, craftsmen, priests. With surplus food and growing populations, these settlements had resources and manpower to build larger structures. Temples and monuments were constructed to honor gods, unify communities, and display rulers' power. This was the accepted sequence: agriculture, then settlements, then population growth, then social complexity, then monumental architecture. It made perfect sense. It was logical. And Göbekli Tepe proved it was completely backward. Here's what made Göbekli Tepe so shocking. It was built by hunter-gatherers. There was no agriculture, no permanent settlements, no pottery, no domesticated animals, no metal tools. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were living exactly as humans had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, hunting wild animals, gathering wild plants. And yet, somehow, These so-called primitive hunter-gatherers organized themselves to quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton stone pillars. They carved intricate reliefs that would challenge modern sculptors. They planned and constructed multiple circular enclosures according to sophisticated geometric principles. They coordinated the labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people over generations. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Everything we thought we knew about human social organization said this level of coordination, this kind of massive construction project, required social structures that only came with agriculture and permanent settlements. But here was proof, literally carved in stone, that we were wrong. Klaus Schmidt and subsequent researchers began piecing together a new narrative, one that turned the traditional story on its head. Imagine the landscape of southeastern Anatolia 12,000 years ago. This region was significantly more lush and fertile than today, teeming with wild game, gazelles, aurochs, wild boar, and covered with wild grains and edible plants. It was a hunter-gatherer's paradise. Different bands of hunter-gatherers moved through this landscape seasonally. But perhaps at certain times of year, perhaps during celestial events, seasonal transitions, or other significant moments, these different groups came together. They gathered at special places, sacred places, for ceremonies and rituals we can only imagine. And at some of these gathering places, they built monuments. Not for practical purposes, there's no evidence of habitation at Göbekli Tepe, no domestic debris, no hearths for cooking. These were purely ceremonial spaces. But here's where it gets interesting. When hundreds of people gather regularly, even if only seasonally, you need to feed them. Wild resources, while abundant, couldn't be relied upon to be in the right place at the right time in sufficient quantities. So perhaps, initially just around ceremonial sites, people began encouraging certain plants to grow. They protected patches of wild wheat and barley. They scattered seeds. They weeded out competing plants. This wasn't yet full agriculture. That would take centuries to develop. But it was the beginning. And the need to feed ceremonial gatherings may have been the push that started the agricultural revolution. As these practices became more sophisticated and successful, people began spending more time near ceremonial sites to tend proto-agricultural plots. Seasonal camps became semi-permanent settlements. Semi-permanent settlements became permanent villages. Population grew in these permanent settlements. Social structures became more complex. And eventually, these villages gave rise to the first true civilizations. In this new narrative, religion, the drive to gather for ceremonial purposes, came first. Religion created the need for reliable food sources. That need drove agricultural development. Agriculture enabled permanent settlements, and settlements gave birth to civilization. Religion didn't emerge from civilization. Civilization emerged from religion. The temple came before the city. How did they do it? This question haunts everyone who visits Göbekli Tepe or studies the archaeological evidence. These hunter-gatherers had no metal tools, no bronze chisels, no iron hammers. They worked with stone tools, flint and obsidian blades, stone hammers and wedges. Yet they quarried, shaped, transported, and erected stones that would challenge modern construction crews. The quarries have been found about 100 meters from main structures. Using stone tools, workers would have carefully selected limestone blocks, then pounded channels around them to free them from bedrock. The largest pillars would have required removing hundreds of tons of surrounding stone just to free a single pillar. Once freed, these multi-ton pillars had to be moved. Without wheels, without draft animals, the only option was human muscle power. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people would have pulled and levered these massive stones using ropes made from plant fibers or animal hide, rolling them on logs, inching them across the landscape. Then came the carving. Using flint tools, artists created the detailed reliefs we see today. The precision is remarkable. Clean lines, smooth surfaces, detailed textures suggesting fur, feathers, and scales. This work would have taken hundreds of hours per pillar. Finally, the pillars had to be raised. Deep pits were dug into bedrock. The pillars were maneuvered into position, a process requiring careful coordination and probably elaborate systems of ropes, levers, and earthen ramps. All of this required more than just muscle power. It required planning, coordination, specialized knowledge, and social organization far more sophisticated than we ever imagined for hunter-gatherer societies. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Göbekli Tepe isn't how it was built or what it meant, but why it was buried. Sometime around 8000 BCE, after the site had been in use for over 1,000 years, the people of Göbekli Tepe did something extraordinary. They deliberately filled in the enclosures. Carefully, systematically, they brought thousands of tons of dirt and rubble and buried their sacred temple. This wasn't accidental. The archaeological evidence clearly shows intentional, rapid burial. Someone made the decision to end this place's sacred function and hide it beneath the earth. Why? We have theories, but no certainties. Perhaps religious beliefs changed, and the old temple was no longer appropriate for worship. Maybe it was a form of ritual closure, a sacred burial for a sacred place. Some researchers speculate that as agriculture developed and people settled into permanent villages, old hunter-gatherer religious practices became incompatible with the new way of life. There's even a theory that the burial was protective, that the people who buried Göbekli Tepe did so to preserve it for the future, understanding their world was changing and wanting to protect this monument to their past. Whatever the reason, the burial preserved Göbekli Tepe almost perfectly. The stones that might have weathered away over millennia were protected beneath meters of soil. When Klaus Schmidt arrived 10,000 years later, the temple was waiting, almost exactly as it had been left. Here's a sobering thought. Everything we've discovered at Göbekli Tepe so far comes from excavating less than 5% of the site. Ground-penetrating radar and other survey techniques have revealed at least 20 additional circular enclosures still buried beneath the surface. And Göbekli Tepe isn't unique. In recent years, archaeologists have discovered several other sites in the region with similar characteristics. Karahan Tepe, Harbet Suvan Tepesi, and others. These sites suggest that Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated anomaly, but part of a broader cultural phenomenon we're only beginning to understand. Göbekli Tepe has forced archaeologists to reconsider assumptions about human capabilities and social development that had seemed certain for decades. We now know that primitive is the wrong word for pre-agricultural humans. The people who built Göbekli Tepe possessed sophisticated understanding of engineering and architecture, advanced artistic capabilities, complex symbolic and religious thought, ability to organize large-scale long-term cooperative projects, and abstract thinking and planning abilities that in some ways, they were just as cognitively capable as modern humans, because they were modern humans, just living in different circumstances with different technologies. Standing at Göbekli Tepe today, looking at massive stones erected by hands that turned to dust millennia before the pyramids were built, you can't help but feel a sense of connection across time. These weren't aliens or mysterious lost civilizations. They were humans, like us. They felt awe and wonder. They pondered their place in the cosmos. They created beauty and meaning in a harsh world. They worked together to build something that would outlast them. And in a very real sense, they succeeded. 12,000 years later, we're still talking about them, still trying to understand them, still amazed by what they achieved.